Greetings Exile and welcome to yet another League Start build guide. Do you want to play a fast ranged off-meta character with high attack and movement speed that drains FPS like no other build while utilizing poison? Do you want to clear most content without spending your last chaos on expensive gear? Then the Cobra Lash Poison Assassin might just be the build you are looking for. In 3.8, GGG reworked most poison passives, items and the Poison Assassin with the goal to make poison a viable damage source. They succeeded, but on the same patch they overbuffed Summoner so literally nobody even tried poison, which means you have an extremely strong mechanic which is super cheap to gear for. Poison is not the easiest mechanic to understand, but the good thing is you don't have to understand it to play it. You can easily reach millions of DPS on the ranged evasion and life-based character. Having a lot of attack speed allows you to dodge literally anything without losing too much DPS. Most of your damage is chaos, which means that even tough enemies are easier to kill compared to using elemental damage. The built-in chain makes Cobra Lash the perfect clearing skill without having to use many support gems to enable clearing big groups of enemies. Which leads me to the first weakness of the build. Since poison stacks can cause lags when used against huge groups of enemies, the only counter to that is even more damage. But you can't pump all resources into damage because the build lacks life. You got a lot of evasion and movement, enabling you to dodge most damage, but you can get one shot if you take an unlucky hit. Your single target life regen is also not that potent, so the motto of the build is just don't get hit. The playstyle is straightforward. Shoot out your Cobra Lash at enemies for a second and watch your enemies die from the poison. Against tougher enemies while mapping, you want to move close, if you can, and use a Withering Step and Plague Bearer. Withering Step will debuff nearby enemies with 6 stacks of Wither, meaning they take 36% increased chaos damage. Plague Bearer activates an aura around you that deals quite a good amount of poison damage to nearby enemies over 8 seconds. This damage is saved when you afflict poisons while Plague Bearer is in its passive state. Since you are dealing huge amounts of poison damage, the buff, which can hold around 1.2 million damage, will be refilled nearly instantly, allowing it to be ready for every single strong enemy you encounter in a map. Against bosses, you have the option to place down a Stormbrand which will curse your enemies. To increase your damage against single targets even more, use your Wither Totems to inflict up to 15 Wither stacks to ensure maximum damage potential. Before you reach endgame and the big bosses, you have to level up your character first. As a shadow, you receive Cobra Lash once you enter the town for the first time, so leveling and socketing is quite easy. While running through the acts, use a multiple projectile support, and against bosses, swap that out for a damage support. Poison itself while leveling doesn't feel quite good, because you need crit and poison on both passives and gear. But once you get some stats going, it will rapidly improve. The leveling progression tree can be found within the PoE. Simply select the part starting from 1 in the bottom left drop down menu. As always, if you feel like you want more toughness or more damage early on, just swap around a few nodes here and there so you feel comfortable. From the Bandit quest, I suggest you help Lyra. Resistances and mana regen, especially while leveling, feel really good, and since the build scales with crit, the crit multi is also welcome. As I mentioned before, poison early felt kinda weak. To counter that, we choose both Noxious Strike and Toxic Delivery as the first assassin nodes. After that, go for Mistwalker, which is the best all-round ascendancy node in the game. Elusive is like Onslaught but on steroids, and the node itself also grants vital damage reduction for the character. Opportunistic is the best choice as 4th Ascendancy node. Movement speed is mandatory in literally every build, and the 20% more damage buff will be up most of the time as well. This build doesn't utilize any extremely rare unique items, which means it should be relatively cheap in most leagues to come. As a weapon, we take the Wasp Nest. It has high attack speed and critical strike chance, as well as a huge damage boost against enemies affected by 5 or more poisons. And because you have such a high attack speed, all tough enemies will literally instantly be infected with enough poisons. Focus on crit chance, followed by DPS. As offhand, Lycos Day is a good choice. The line that says your hits can't be evaded literally means we have 100% chance to hit, even without investing into accuracy. However, if you get some high accuracy rating rolls on your rare gear, then you can always go either dual wielding or take a different, more defensive shield, depending on what you need. As a chest piece, Dendrobait is best choice DPS wise. It essentially grants us a 7-link Cobra Lash as well as huge DPS buffs. Once you hit more than 300 dex and 150 int, this item really starts to shine. The glove's venomous weave can be quite rare in the first days of the league, because they are a bestiary drop. The grand aspect of the spider, an aura that itself gives both defense and offense against close enemies. In addition to that, they also give strong offensive and defensive stats, while the aspect is active. As helmet, I used Ista Conjures. Attack speed, crit, life, evasion and a lot of dex. Everything this build needs. If you find yourself starved from resistances, then simply swap to a rare helmet instead. Talking about rare gear, your first priority should be to reach the 75% resistance cap on every elemental resistance, as well as getting all space stats like intelligence to the required amount. After that, get as much life as possible. Don't forget to get movement speed and maybe even onslaught on your boots. Also, if you can, get some evasion or chaos resistance. Evasion is our secondary defense after life in this build. If you want a bit more damage or agility, you can also take attack speed and added chaos damage on jewelry, for example. I like to craft minus mana chaos to non-challenging skills on my jewelry, so you don't have to worry about leeching or draining your mana too fast. Really important, you want onslaught somewhere, so if you don't get it from your boots or flasks, try to get it on an abyss jewel. The best stats on your jewels are life or critical strike multiplier, depending if you want offense or defense. Other options are shown on the screen right now. Let's go over the flasks. You can swap around quite a few on this build. An instant life flask, however, is never a bad idea. Huge damage boost comes from a diamond flask. If you can't afford a Correlator signature early into the league, then a magic diamond flask is sufficient for most content. You might have noticed that even with the Corralitos I still have perfect agony in my passive tree. That's because in longer boss fights you won't be able to keep up flasks at all times, and thus would lose a lot of damage. Other damage flasks are a Serious Promise or a Sulfur flask. Defensive options are a Jade or a Stibnite, and since I don't have Onslaught anywhere else, I really wanted it for bosses, I'm using a Silver flask. You can choose depending on what you feel like is more important to you, damage or defense. Also, make sure to get bleed, freeze and curse immunity on your magic flasks. You can check the flask and all other gear I just talked about in the PoE provided in the video description. Here you can see some example anointments I suggest. Feel free to use any other, depending on your needs. As always, we got two categories, offense and defense, at 3 price points. I do not want to go over those, since they pretty much represent the stats we want on rare gear and jewels, and thus are self-explanatory. One special anoint would be Vengeance Cascade, which grants your projectiles the effect to return to you once they finish their chaining, a stat that you cannot simply get on rare gear. Really valuable. Let's go over all the skills now. Cobra Lash is your main skill gem. Nearly all damage comes from that small green projectile, inflicting poison on every attack. Since the skill itself chains 5 times, there is no need for a chain support while mapping. If you feel like you got more than enough damage, then just go and replace Vile Toxins with Chain. Your movement ability is Whirling Blades, linked with Fortify, a strong defensive buff, and faster attacks for easier dodging as a 3-link. Another 3-link is the Stormbrand with Despair Curse on hit, which you only use against tough enemies and bosses. The last 3-link is the Plague Bearer with Empower and increased area of effect. I talked about how to use its skill earlier. Your actual only 4-link are the Wither Totems. Place them down against big bosses for a strong Wither debuff. There are 5 gem sockets left that do not need to be linked to anything. One is the before mentioned Withering Step and one is Blood Rage, a nice attack speed buff. The last 3 sockets are your mana reservation skills. Flesh and Stone provides a strong defensive boost, especially against nearby enemies when you're engaging with Withering Step and Plague Bearer. Summon Skitterbots chill your enemies for reduced action speed, and shock them for increased damage taken. The last socket is Precision. You should leave it at level 1 until you reach higher character levels, and then you can increase it as long as you feel comfortable with your current mana pool. Depending on if you're mapping or bossing, you might want to change a few skills around. In your main skill setup, take Greater Multiple Projectiles and if you got huge damage, Chain Support while mapping. While bossing, swap Chain to Vile Toxins and Greater Multiple Projectiles to avoid manipulation. The rest stays the same in both scenarios. And now, last and probably least, Pantheon. I like Lunaris as major because you oftentimes get quite close to enemies in both mapping and bossing. For pure bossing, Solaris is the better choice. Garukan or Gruthkul are both good defensive choices as minor. If you like this video, then please leave a like and subscribe to my channel for new and updated content. If however you dislike this video, then please tell me why. I really care about improving. Questions? You can ask down in the comments, or on my Twitch stream. I'm not on a schedule, but you can ask me any questions there when I'm live. Link is down in the video description. I also have a lot of guides on my channel, not only build guides but also knowledge guides, so make sure to check them out as well. I hope you're having a great day. Thank you very much for watching. I am Jay, and I'm out.